You're listening to Accents, a radio show for literature, art, and culture. I'm your host, Katerina Stoikova, and my guest today is writer Jody Lisberger. Hi, Jody, how are you?
I'm great. How are you, Katerina?
Doing really well and excited to talk to you. I haven't seen you in person in a few years, but so happy to catch up with you.
Thank you. Yes, and ditto, knowing how inspiring and powerful your work is and what a joy it was to know you when we were both at Spalding.
Thank you so much, Jody. You're an inspiring teacher, and everybody who has worked with you says that you've changed their life and their writing.
Oh, thank you.
Let me introduce you to our listeners with a couple sentences. Jody Lisberger is the author of the short story collection Remember Love, published by Fleur-de-Lis Press in 2008. She has taught fiction, creative nonfiction, literature, and feminist theory at Brown, Harvard, Tufts, Spalding University, University of Rhode Island, and other esteemed places. Jody, what are you working on these days?
I'm taking my summer, which is always, they always say there are 3 good reasons to teach: June, July, and August.
I love it.
Teach at the university. I've been revising my final revision, famous last words, of my novel called You Don't Know the Half of It. And I also spent some time in May working on a few short stories in a collection I'm compiling called House Pets and Other People. But my goal for June was really to totally revise my novel, and I've finished doing that yesterday, so I'm thrilled.
I would love to hear more about the novel.
Sure. My novel is set in Rhode Island in 2001 and 2002. It's about Verna Roy, who is a glass blower after she's a wedding cake maker. She thinks she's going to blow glass as a way of pulling her out of a kind of tailspin, though I suspect she might go back to wedding cake making. The novel really raises the question of how does family loyalty pull at us in ways we don't expect. And in this novel, you don't know the half of it. For the first time in her life, 43-year-old wedding cake maker Verna Roy is facing this question after her gay twin sister dies and her older son comes out. Verna has to confront the difficult choices of allegiance, self-protection, and forgiveness in a family that's filled with silences and hurt, but also love. And it's told in 2 voices: Verna's voice in the first person, and her 18-year-old son's, Franklin. He's a carpenter. Excuse me, he's a carpenter. And he's a little bit lost in facing the fact that he's found out that his older brother is gay, and that's shattered his expectation a little bit, and his father has left the house, and I would say it's a household drama. But
Congratulations on finishing
Thank you.
this book, and best of luck with it.
Thank you. I'm looking for an agent as we speak.
Yeah. What are you going to read for us today?
I'm going to read a section at the end of the first part of the book. The book is in 3 parts. First, Fall, which takes place in October of 2001. And then Winter, which takes place in December 2001, and then Spring, which takes place in May 2002. And this is a section where Verna has finally had her dear old friend Jenny, a neighbor, come out with some truths that she's been waiting to hear up until this point, which is probably about a page 140. Verna hasn't known if Jenny, her neighbor, knows that Jenny's, one of her sons, is Verna's son's lover. And Henry, Jenny's son, and Verna's son, Elliot, have gone off together to Alaska to do salmon fishing, actually. And this is a moment where Jenny is finally outing with the fact that she knows. It's a difficult moment because Verna has also become divorced in this process. And Jenny's husband is a fairly strict man. And this is the moment where Jenny sort of reads a verdict to Verna. Shall I go ahead and read? Great. So this is from the novel, You Don't Know the Half of It. It's impossible, I say, my voice louder than I expect. Our sons are gay because, no. Jenny raises her hand flat in front of me. Listen, I know you might find this surprising because you don't think I speak out to Mickey, that's her husband. But this morning I told him he was very wrong to condemn Martin. I told him Martin is brave to come out of the closet and a very fine teacher who would never hurt his students. Her voice is passionate and edgy at the same time, but as she stops, tears rim her eyes. That's when he pushed me again, she says ever so softly. Not a slight push, but a shove hard against my face, hard enough to bang my head. She makes her head whip backwards as if it were hitting something behind her, then looks right at me. Did Ansel, that's the name of Verna's husband, did Ansel ever push you like that? She asks very softly. I mean, when he found out things he didn't like or didn't believe in, did he push you, hit you? Is that why you made him leave? Ansel, hit me? I mean, isn't that why you're thinking of selling your house now, she asks, to get away from the place he's ruined? If I could open my mouth to speak, I'm not sure what I'd say. All I can hear is a pounding in my head and a terrible pressure in my ears. All of it pummeling like a wave roaring toward me. I look up into the looming pines, their lower bare branches like scabbards pointing in 100 directions. I wonder how much longer I can sit here and not spill out my whole story. Where would I start? But Jenny is shaking her head. You know, I haven't told him about Henry, she says, propping forward in her chair. I'm surprised at the sudden gentleness in her voice. She pulls out a folded paper from her back pocket, opens it, and stares at it. All these years, and I'm sure Mickey has suspected, but he's never said or asked anything. Nor did he see this letter or the postcard that came yesterday. Her voice sounds weary, but maybe that's why he pushed me. He must know about Henry. So this Martin thing, she lets her voice drift. What do you think, Verna? Should I show him the letter and get it over with? I hold still as I take a breath, wishing I didn't feel all over again the painful consequences of telling Ansel the truth, thinking he would understand, would forgive me, would realize from the beginning he and I had made a terrible mistake about being so quiet about Elliot, about Eliza, too. Eliza is Verna's gay twin sister who died. About Eliza, too, that such silence put a chasm between us. I hear again Jenny's earlier words. Maybe he was scared. Maybe we're all scared, I want to tell Jenny, which is why I'm hesitating now and why I'm afraid for Jenny. Maybe you shouldn't tell him until he asks, I say softly. Henry's letter was addressed to you, wasn't it? Jenny's eyes grow round with surprise. What? She asks as if she hasn't heard me. I take a big breath. Maybe you should wait to tell him until he asks, or until Henry tells him himself. What? Jenny says again, though this time she draws her head inward, her chin pulled tight against her thick neck. You would keep the truth from your husband? I choose my next words very carefully. Mickey might not react well. He might. As I pause, a flurry of thoughts fills my mind. He might hate you for being the truth bearer, for saying what he doesn't want to hear. It might be too much for him. He might hurt you. He might leave. But I know it's wisest to give Jenny back the words she will understand. It might scare him, I say, surprised at the tight whisper coming out of my throat. Verna. Jenny looks long and hard into my eyes. Her voice comes from a deep, stern place in her throat. Why really is Mickey telling me I can't come to your house anymore? Can't spend time with you after today? What happened, really? The breath I draw is as fragile as a spindle of glass. How could Mickey know anything? Certainly not from Henry or Elliot or Ansel. I made a mistake, I say, my heart racing. What were you hiding from Ansel? Jenny raises a single finger and holds it up in front of me. I grab the arms of my chair and get ready to push myself up. I was hiding nothing, I say. I told him no, Jenny says, making her finger rigid between us. Mickey says you cheated on Ansel. He says I need to stay away from you, that he would tell you himself, but I insisted I tell you face to face. Here at my house, I would be honest. Isn't that our way? She glares at me as if afraid I might answer. You need to go home now. She says so loudly, it's as if she wants someone else to hear too, but not to see the tears welling up in her eyes. As I walk alone past Jenny's garden, her fire pit, her scarlet hedges of burning bush, I wonder if Jenny gets up to watch me go. All along their driveway, I tell myself not to turn around, let Jenny be upset at my departure. Let her see how it feels to be suddenly alone, or maybe how it feels to speak your mind and know you've said what you need to say, even though you know it brings an end to things and leaves you walking solo. Solo. The word rings in my head as I stop to gaze at a cluster of milkweeds bursting like women out of their corsets. I reach across the gully to snap off a few stems, careful not to touch the poison ivy or get the milky pith on my clothes or hands. I hold the stems upright, thinking how odd it is right now to be gathering a bouquet of dying things. Nothing like the last bouquet I held in my arms, the yellow roses, sweet and soft 9 years ago, now brittle and dry. Those were the roses from Eliza's funeral. The 2 roses I have left, wrapped in a handkerchief so they don't fall apart. For a moment, everything about that day comes rushing back to me, how with every rose I handed out, it felt like I was giving a piece of Eliza to each person to carry forever, including me. Now as I hold the milkweeds and feel not cold but hot, I let the word solo echo deep in my head. Such a different sensation for a twin, not other or half, not 2, but 1. I feel my throat constrict, my tears rise. How do you go forward as 1 when you've always gone as 2, even without realizing it? You need to come with me. No, I hear myself say aloud, hating this moment of saying that word, no. But suddenly I have the answer to Ansel's question, why 9 years to say goodbye to Eliza? because it took me that long to realize I've been living my life as only a half, I could have told him. Other wholes eclipsing my half, including yours. Slowly as I walk toward home, I remind myself to breathe in and out. As I come down the dirt road, I gaze at the house, the barn, the yard, the stone walls, the woods. This is set in Rhode Island. The place I love, but know I need to move on from now, to start from scratch, to find myself. What I don't expect are the tears that rise through my body, choking me. I put my hands to my face and cry as if I've never cried before. Who could have thought it would take me this long to see how tightly I've been holding on to Eliza, or how tightly she's been holding on to me? As I look up into the murky sky, I raise the milkweeds and blow a few silken parachutes into the air. I watch them float, not down, but up. So unlike the maple seedlings Eliza and I, and sometimes Danny, used to collect in the springtime and throw into the air. Watch them whirligig around. As I watch the silken seeds float upwards, I think about that man who drove his bus into the river. Didn't he want to live more than anything else? Isn't that what Eliza wanted too? Isn't that what we all want? In the shade beside the barn, the old truck sits like it's been there forever. Sharon's sweater looped around the antenna. The whir of the drill press floats into the air. On the stoop, Cheyenne rises and shakes her whole body like she could walk right out of her skin. As I pat her, I feel my throat tighten one more time, wondering how I could be thinking of giving her up, and yet wondering, deep down, how I could keep her with me in this time when I feel such a need to let go of everything and go off empty-handed. For a second, I closed my eyes, remembering the day Ansel brought Cheyenne home. 2 weeks after Eliza died, none of us expected him to arrive with the silkiest, softest, white setter puppy you could imagine, zipped inside his parka with only her head peeking out. He had already named her Cheyenne for one of his favorite places. For years, the boys and I had begged for a dog. All along, Ansel had said, "No, a dog ties you down." Wasn't that the point? But he must have seen how powerfully the new beagle puppies at Jenny's and Mickey's had attracted the boys a week earlier. After my odd encounter with Mickey in their kitchen, when Jenny called and asked us to come over to see a great surprise, she said, I thought she was only trying to apologize in her own way, sharing the things of her household. Bring Ansel too, she said, not usually a place he liked to go. But my need for comfort, or maybe amends, and his desire to please me brought us all over there. We didn't expect Jenny to meet us at the door as she cradled 2 floppy-eared, squash-nosed, identical pups close to her chest. Such sweeties, she crooned, kissing first Samson, so named, she told us, because one of his ears had been bitten off in the whelping box. Such a sweetheart, she then whispered as she ran her lips along Delilah's soft head. She turned Delilah to be face to face with her. How could you bite off your brother's ear? She asked, chuckling, as she kissed Delilah's nose. Our boys could hardly wait to take their turns holding the puppies. Ansel stood back and watched them bring each one close to their faces. Like Jenny, they skimmed their lips over the puppies' soft heads, careful not to touch where Samson's ear was still a slightly scabbed scar. When we got home, of course, the pleading began anew. Can't we please get a puppy? We'll do our chores. We'll learn responsibility. We'll learn love. We promise. But still, at least I didn't expect Ansel to be swayed. As he unzipped his jacket and let the boys each cradle Cheyenne, I kept thinking this was Ansel's way of apologizing for not letting the boys come to the funeral. His way, too, of showing me his caring and love. That night after the boys fell asleep with Cheyenne's crate between them, he offered his own reason. It's good to show the boys how life goes on, how love goes on, even when someone dies. Right, Verna? I couldn't help but think he was asking me a favor, too. Now as I lay the empty milkweed side by side on the counter, the roughness of their pods makes me want to reach up and touch my cheek. Reassure myself that everything is safe in the softness of my hands, even when my hands are empty. Do I need to give up Cheyenne too, this gift of love from Ansel, this tie to Eliza's dying, this intense pull on my heartstrings if I'm truly to go free and find myself alone? In the quiet, I stare at the parched pods and stems, faced with the most trivial decision: put them in water or keep them dry. I can't decide. It's as if the weight of lost love hovering over me is too heavy. For me and Jenny, at least for now. For me and Franklin, at least for now. And for me and Ansel. I hang my head. If anything was going to drive us apart, I wish it had been an honest conversation about how we were no longer giving each other the love we needed, how our silence hurt us, our love grown too thin, too fragile. I look down at my hands, brace myself as a tumbling wave of disappointment comes over me. If our divorce was bound to happen, waiting to happen, needing to happen, can one really speak in these terms? Then I wish I had made it more honorable on my part. But it was a mistake. We all make mistakes. For a second, I hold still, letting myself imagine that's Eliza speaking to me. I gaze out the picture window at the hazy sky. Down in the workshop, the drill press churns. In the house, the lights flicker. Sometimes vines grow together and hold each other up, and sometimes they grow apart, but they don't stop growing. Elliot surprised me by saying the morning he left. First, he'd asked if Ansel was angry, if we would be getting a divorce. I said I feared it might be so, not that I knew for sure, or knew then, as I want to believe now, the other words ringing in my head. Some mistakes are good, can make you face the things you've been afraid of facing or didn't dare admit were there all along. So true, I whisper, not needing to close my eyes or stomp my foot to tell Eliza to back off, because I know it's not Eliza's voice I hear, but my own. Thanks. That's the end of the first section of the novel.
Wow, Jody. You are one who would never back out from a difficult topic, from a complex topic.
I guess
loved it.
True. Thank you.
Wow. I mean, it has so much. It has going from the last, what I heard, to the first, it has all the complexity of our relationships. You know, how the long falling apart of love, basically.
Well, and you know, I can say that as a surviving twin and parent, both, I wrote this novel partly to delve into how being the other half impacts a twin trying to go solo. But I also wrote it to explore mother-son and father-son relationships, hoping to probe those tensions and changes that have evolved in a new century of altered norms about gender. And, you know, unlike Verna, I have two grown daughters. She has a 19 and 18-year-old son. So it was a little bit of a venture for me. And both of my daughters are married with children. But as a feminist scholar, I have long been fascinated by father-son and mother-son relationships and the presence of LGBTQ children in families. So I think through my students and obviously my sons-in-law, and many friends and many people I know, I have observed these patterns changing in such good ways. There's always the tug back and the reluctance that I was trying to write a novel that would capture that.
I was so moved by everything that you read. I can't find the words to, organize my thoughts to say, but there is so much, and it's so important, and it's so viable, and it's all happening right now in us and in our societies, in our families.
Right.
Joy, how many years have you worked on it?
I've worked a long time on this novel, a long time, though I have to say that so many things came between the start of this novel and then I sort of left it aside for 8 or 10 years while I published a short story collection. That took 5 or 6 years, the whole process. Built a house with Mike, saw him through a serious accident where his leg was crushed. He's fine now, he walks great. And I was chair of Gender and Women's Studies at URI for 6 years. And anybody knows that when you're chair of a department, you lose your life. So you lose your creative brain because you have to compartmentalize so much. So for me to get back to it and finish it, I really think it's gotten, this is a very powerful sort of culminating moment because it's that point, it's a crucial turning point in the novel, right, for Verna, where she realizes finally that she's listening to her own voice. And not Eliza's voice and not other voices. So it's kind of culminating, but I was, so I'm pleased. I think I've gotten to be a better writer, a more sympathetic soul. And the thing that I was really working on in this draft was to make Verna more sympathetic, to make Ansel, her ex-husband, endearing and sympathetic in some ways. And her son, Franklin, to make his life in terms of what does it mean, given the clash of liberation and toxic masculinity that we still face in our culture, what does it mean to be 18 and worry about who you are relative to your gay brother who you love?
So let me ask you this, because that applies to me a little bit too. You have a project, you have, let's say, draft of a novel, or I guess many pages of a project. And then you step away from like 8 to 10 years. And then how do you go back to that?
Right.
Is it even possible? Obviously it is. Tell us how. Tell me how.
Well, I've never really stepped away from it. I think that I was very embarrassed once to take one of those "what kind of dog are you" quizzes that are ridiculously in dentist's office and things like that, where you have to answer all these questions and then they tell you if you were a dog, what breed you would be. I was very, not that I don't like Jack Russells, but I couldn't imagine myself going into a foxhole and grabbing that fox and never letting go. Sometimes it's just been necessity. I think I've also tried, I've played around and changed this novel a whole lot. And some dear writer friends have given me very powerful advice. I've tried changing the structure. It's been all in present tense. It wasn't marked by dates. It was, and maybe with something this complicated, it just, I'm a crackpot thinker maybe. And it just took me time. I remember when A.J. Verdell an incredible writer, said, if you can't make decisions, don't be a writer. And for me, maybe I wasn't ready yet to make some crucial decisions. But I also think, and this novel takes place around glass blowing as well. And when you blow glass, which is, I didn't learn to blow glass till I'd written half the novel. And then I learned to blow glass. And novel writing, like glass blowing, though you don't know it, or glass making, is layer by layer, right? Those people who've never blown glass think you just go in and you pop your pipe or your punty into the molten glass, and then you blow into it, and lo and behold, you have something. And that's a very naive but marvelous kind of wishful image. I think novel writing for me is, no, actually glass blowing. First, you don't get to blow the glass. You have to learn how to gather it layer by layer, shape it, reheat it, shape it. How the heck do you get glass off the end of a punty? That's a novel thing. Do most of us know that when you pick up a glass that's been blown, it's actually upside down from how it used to be? So everything turns over. And maybe in a way, I have found that to be a very resonant metaphor for me in terms of writing. I think when things are difficult, we see them layer by layer, and we have to press on those layers in order to lead us to other layers, kind of like the Zamboni, I guess, layer by layer.
Yes, I agree. And what I've been thinking recently is that we cannot make our writing separate from our own journeys as human beings and our own process. And sometimes our own process takes a lot longer than we wish it would take us to write a book about that process. and they kind of need to be aligned, because if I figure everything out and I don't have time to write about it over this 3-year period, then likely I'm talking to myself about myself. I won't go back to write about that because I don't happen to have a real and direct benefit from it to my own human journey. Because to me, both of them are attached.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think of two things: loving the fact that yoga teachers always tell us it's directional. It's a process. It's a lifelong process. I remember when my children years ago first started playing, I think it was called Nintendo, and Mario and Luigi. I never got out of World 1 because I was such a klutz doing that. But they used to get into World 678, and I would watch them, and they would push on a brick, and a world would open up. And I would think to myself, I'd say, how did you know to push on that brick? Well, they accidentally pushed on a brick in World 1 or World 2, and they learned that by pushing on a brick, you open a world. So I think writing and life are very much like that. First, we have to have the nerve we have to, by mistake, push on a brick, or maybe by some wishful thinking, push on an opportunity or a brick, and something opens up, a new world. And that, going into that new world, opens up another brick that we could push on for another new. So I think that, yes, our writing and our lives, they're a joined process, as you say.
Such pleasure talking to you, Jody. I have one last question, and then I wish.
Yes.
My last question is, and I've asked it to you before because I've had the pleasure of talking to you before on the show, and this is a question that I ask all my guests who teach creative writing, and that is, what is the most important thing you teach your students of creative writing, if there is one thing you want them to remember from your class or your workshop, what is it?
This is going to sound silly, maybe, that verbs are the most important thing.
Okay.
That it's funny, I've been reading to my grandkids books, and how many of those stories have very compelling verbs. So that would be one thing, would be verbs. Another thing might be that scene work, the work we do in scenes, to me, and I can run an exercise, I do this with my students. Scene work is like pebbles. And in the scales of justice, the sort of heavy ideas, the abstract ideas, the talk of love or death, wish, yearning, wants, those are the rocks. And if we fill something that we're writing with only pebbles, then the scales of justice lean that direction, and it's only seen. And the reader wonders, why am I reading? It's just a lot of scene. What do you want me, rattle my brain, rattle the furniture in my brain? And if we write something that is just filled with heavy, 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 then it tilts even worse, perhaps the other direction. So the important thing for me to remember as a writer is that it takes a lot of pebbles to counterbalance one rock, and that we can write very vivid scenes and sliver in that heavy thing in just a sentence or maybe even a fragment, and then move right back into scene, that our reader does not need us to wait there. So I combine metaphors a million times here by saying scene work is pebbles. We need a lot of pebbles, and they're very particular, and look at pebbles, they're full of colors and texture, to counterbalance one rock in a scene. And then I also think about sliver, even though I'm mixing my metaphors, which is that in writing, we can interject that rock in just the smallest way, a sliver, because when you think about how slivers impact our fingertips or a place we get a sliver, we can have the littlest sliver in the world, but it really bothers us. So scene work is so important. And then the rocks can just move in, and then we can move right back into scene. I guess that would be something I would say.
Thank you so much. And
you're welcome.
My wish is, because I speak through the virtual mic and the universe listens, I wish that in not too distant future, Jody Lisberger is back on Accents with a newly published novel in one hand, a newly published short story collection in the other, smiling widely, being super happy and ready to talk to us about these accomplishments.
Thank you so much, Katerina. And I'm very grateful to be here and always admiring of your amazing work and inspiration. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Jody.